Chapter 51. Fighting Spirit. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Exile's eyes went wide as a large figure burst through the remaining flames towards him. His expression sank when he saw that. Damn! Exile knew in his heart that there was nothing more that he could do. He could only hold out for as long as possible now that it had reached this point. The lost warrior captain slashed with his mighty axe. A dull thud followed the blow as it struck Exile's shield. 0.7 HP, Exile watched as his health reached 44/65. It's only a matter of time now. Exile sighed heavily and squinted at his enemy. A surge of adrenaline coursed through his body as his hands trembled. He began a violent slugfest with the mob. 0.7 HP, 0.7 HP, his health had now dropped below 50%, but he did not care. Exile kept bashing with his shield and cutting with his axe. All to no avail. As time went on, the damage he sustained accumulated while he got used to the captain's fighting style. 0.7 HP, 0.7 HP, 0.7 HP, although he blocked most attacks successfully, it made no difference to his plummeting health points. Exile's breathing had become ragged as he glared at the captain with a hate-filled expression. He only had 9 HP left, so he knew their fight was almost over. The captain stuck out a hand towards Exile and beckoned him to come. Exile's face turned red at the naked taunt. The captain knew that there was nothing Exile could do to him. Exile bellowed a roar of defiance as he rushed in. He dodged the kick that the captain aimed at him and slammed his shield on the enemy's knee. A heavy sensation struck his back at the same time. 0.7 HP, the captain sent Exile sliding across the floor, face down. Before he could turn over to defend himself, the enemy leapt towards him. Exile groaned as the captain's knee landed on his back, locking him in place. No matter how he struggled, he could not break free. Then, it happened. HP 0/65, Exile's vision turned white as the captain dealt the finishing blow. You have died. Generating Divine Orb. Endurance 0.7, Authority 0.4, Speed 0.2, Strength 0.1, Exile's mind went blank as it instantly halved his total stats. Exile's expression turned grim as he stood amongst a never-ending white mist. He reviewed the fight in his mind, but there was nothing he could have done that would have led to a better outcome. I should have turned this quest down. Exile sighed as a look of helplessness crossed his face. I wonder how the others are doing. Just then, his vision went blank again as he disappeared from inside the mist. When he opened his eyes, he was standing in a white marble square room. Indigo-colored wisps floated around, allowing him to see the contents of the room. There was a solitary chest a mere 3 steps in front of him. Is this a consolation prize? Like how Donna and Bean still received a reward when they failed. Exile was finding it hard to be excited. He doubted the tomb could give him anything to make up for his lost stats. With a frown on his face, he stepped forward to open the chest. There were a few things inside, but one of them made his eyes go wide. Exile's Divine Orb. He did not know whether to laugh or cry at this sight. However, that did not stop him from absorbing it before he paid any attention to the other things. A sense of warmth spread throughout his body as it restored his stats. Let's try to avoid dying from now on. Exile heaved a sigh of relief as his eyes watered up. Do you always receive your orb if you die in a tomb? Exile considered the matter briefly, but decided he would have to talk to the others to gather more information. The next item he inspected was a bag with 50 gold in it. It's better than nothing, I guess. The last item inside the chest was a parcel. Exile frowned as he reached out to grab it. However, a notification interrupted his action. Lost warrior captain, weakened, had less than 10% health left. Generating bonus reward based on your performance, common raider armor set, +1 endurance, +1 speed, description. Show them you mean business with this armor set. Exile's eyebrow twitched as he read the description. He was certain that the developers were treating these pieces of text as a joke. The armor appeared in his inventory, and he wore it right away. Exile's new armor consisted of thick leather, with some accompanying metal parts around the shoulders and waist. The collar had been made of fur, just like the heavy boots. While the gauntlets had fur in the interior, but metal on the back of the hands and up the forearms. It would have been better if the speed stat boost was authority instead. Exile sighed as he studied his new outfit. Still, it looks a lot better than before. Now that the chest was empty, a section of the wall behind him slid open. Exile raised an eyebrow before deciding that it should be safe. The short passageway that was revealed led him directly to the indigo door at the start of the tomb. Exile glanced around at the figures waiting there. It surprised him to see that they did not look any better off for their experience in the tomb. What? Why'd you get new gear? Leggy complained as he eyed Exile with a sour expression. Don't mind him. He's a little on edge. Old Un cut in before Exile could say anything. He died before reaching the rune at the end of his passage. Now he's lost 50% of his stats. Exile's eyes went wide before he looked at Leggy with some sympathy. I guess that answers my question about always receiving your orb. He sighed before glancing around once again. Wait. Where's Clay? Chapter 52. Great Expectations. You are listening at novelfull.audio. He's still in there. Old Un said when he noticed the look on Exile's face. Exile raised an eyebrow at Old Un's statement. He could not hide the look of surprise that crossed his face, which made Old Un laugh. Don't underestimate Clay. He's stronger than you think. Leggy said with a boastful voice and a look that said their group was amazing. That or his trial is better suited to him. Exile hummed as he considered the likelihood of that being true. Maybe these tombs are designed to be completed by people with specific elements. Exile felt his latest theory was probably a stretch too far. Although, it would not surprise him if the legacy item could only be claimed by someone with a matching element. Besides that, it should be possible to claim the rest of the items. Seeing how everyone else had resigned themselves to wait it out, Exile took a seat on the floor nearby. When another half hour had passed, the group became irritated. Waiting was one thing, but not knowing the situation was worse. What would they do if Clay had become trapped with no way out? Although they doubted the possibility of it actually happening, they could not stop worrying about it. If I knew how long Clay would still be in there, I could use Avatar to find out what's going on in Iraldsfen. Exile sighed as he glanced at his companions. But I'd be defenseless if Clay exits while my consciousness is in the mortal realms. There's no telling if they would honor our deal at that point. He was not keen on wasting time, but it looked like he had no other choice. Exile had to stick with the party until they returned to Valheim at least. Unless he wanted to leave himself open to an ambush from Kaleidoscope. I just hope they stand and fight if Kaleidoscope really tries something. Exile waited patiently while browsing his thoughts on the game so far. There were plenty of new ideas that he had never seen before. In all honesty, he felt that the game would go far. It just remains to be seen what approach they'll take during general release. Exile struggled to see what game the developers were playing with Pantheon. It was groundbreaking in many areas. However, if players were to be banned from the game, then who would be willing to pay for it? Not many, I bet. He was certain they would have a plan on how to deal with financing the game. Luckily, he was not forced to wait around much longer, as a flash of light appeared next to them. Clay took several moments to digest what had happened before he broke into a wide grin. We did it, boys. A chorus of cheers went up from the group, well, from everyone except Exile. He squinted at Clay as he tried to figure out what he had gained from the trials. Besides the horn, of course. But Clay did not appear to have any new equipment. Clay flashed a smirk in Exile's direction when he saw that he was being studied. I'm not hiding anything. I chose an amulet for myself. Exile raised an eyebrow at how casually Clay had shared that information. Well, so far he hasn't tried anything, and everyone is being pretty transparent. Maybe they're not so bad. Even though he thought that, he still would prefer to seek his own comrades and build his own pantheon. If he were to join these guys, then Clay would definitely end up as the leader. Which would mean that he would have to trust him not to get his account ruined by bad decisions. I'd rather make the decisions myself. At least then I only have myself to blame if it goes wrong. Exile sighed as he looked over the joyous expressions on their faces. It reminded him of better times with a team that were genuinely excited to just play games. Since we're all here, we may as well head back to Valheim. Clay announced as before turning his attention to the indigo barrier. Wait. Exile frowned as he glanced at the group as they stood up. We still need to deal with the lost warriors on the other side. Clay raised an eyebrow as he studied Exile's expression. What do you mean? Don't they disappear once we complete the tomb? Needless to say, the others stared at Exile with confused expressions. It was an established fact in other games that the enemies would disappear whenever a dungeon was completed. They would obviously question this piece of information. I'm not saying that they haven't. But be prepared to fight your way out. It's better to be prepared, and we're still 2 men down. Exile shared a knowing look with Clay. They considered the weight of his words as they remembered what they had left behind when they had entered the tomb. None of them felt hopeful about being able to pull off another miracle. Clay. I lost half of my stats. There's no way I can survive for long if they are waiting for us. Leggy hung his head as he spoke. Everyone glanced at him with a grim expression. So, we really only have 3 effective team members. Clay rubbed his face as he thought about what they could do if Exile was correct. Okay, here's what we'll do. No matter what. Exile must survive. Exile's eyes went wide as he stared at Clay with his mouth wide open. What did he just say? Exile. You probably have the highest survivability out of all of us. With your endurance and healing spells you have the best chance of surviving. Clay sighed while he glanced at everyone. Just, try to secure our orbs if we die. Clay and the others stared at Exile with expectant expressions. But Exile was unsure how to feel about the sudden display of trust. What really made him realize they were being serious was when he was handed the orbs of those who had already died during the quest. Chapter 53. Too far. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The group stood before the barrier with grim expressions plastered on their faces. Clay and Exile stood at the front, ready to take on the first wave. Just as Clay was about to touch the barrier and start their escape, something happened that made Exile grin. Wait. Exile's eyes went to the notification that had just appeared in his mind. Milestone reached. Followers 52/50. Awarding +1 stat point. New milestone. Followers 52 out of 100. Clay raised an eyebrow at his companions as he wondered what was going on. But Exile did not elaborate. He merely gestured to wait a moment. It's obvious what I should pick. With that thought, he sunk the new point into endurance. Congratulations. You have reached level 4. With that notification, Exile grinned. He had taken the next step, which was always a good feeling no matter what game he played. To think I almost lost half my progress. Exile shook his head as he pulled up his status. Name. Exile, title. God of the Hearth, race. Local deity, human, tier. 0, level. 4, HP, 70/70ths, 55 + 15, DP. 10 out of 10, 8 + 2, strength. 5, endurance. 14, 11 + 3, speed. 7, 6 + 1, authority. 10, 8 + 2, Exile nodded with satisfaction before glancing towards Clay. You can start now. Clay rolled his eyes as he wondered who was really in charge. Exile had given him that order so naturally. Forget it, it's probably just a slip of the tongue. Clay turned his attention back on the barrier as dispelled his doubts. When his palm touched upon the barrier, it slowly became translucent, revealing that Exile's warning was true. Although Clay had taken precautions and listened to Exile's advice, he had still hoped that the latter was wrong. Rows of lost warriors were waiting on the other side. As Exile cast his gaze over them, he realized that this time would be different compared to the time in Olivia's tomb. The lost souls over there had been pressed against the barrier in a frenzied mob. But the lost warriors were waiting in organized formations, calmly waiting for them to step out from the protective area. Exile frowned as he looked over at them. The formations are more densely packed in a straight line from the barrier to the exit. But if we try to go through the edges where there's less of them, they'll have time to reorganize and block our escape. Exile did not like the level of intelligence that these mobs were displaying. It was as if they were trying to give them some hope, only to crush their morale when they attempted to exploit them. However, he had to admit, it was a fresh feeling to be put to the test like this. Come to think of it, what's with these guys? Why can't they enter the tomb? When we first arrived, it did not look like they were guarding it. Instead, they looked like an army trying to break in. It was just a random thought of his, but Exile thought it may be relevant to the lore of the game world. Could it be that they're actually the remnants of an invading army? Or the survivors of the force that killed the god? Maybe he was just leaping to conclusions. It was also possible that the developers just thought that they would make a good enemy at this stage of the game. They've got holes in their formation around the edges. That's our ticket out of here. Clay's eyes lit up as he studied the mobs. The others in the group nodded with his assessment. Except for Exile, who raised an eyebrow at Clay's statement. He felt like slapping himself in the face after hearing that, but he restrained himself. No, take a look at their layout. Those holes are positioned so that they can be filled. That will buy this army enough time to seal off our escape. Exile pointed out the holes and their proximity to the areas where there were more mobs gathered. The actual weak point of this is to go straight through them. Clay raised an eyebrow as everyone turned to look at Exile as if he were crazy. What makes you say that? If we go straight through, they don't have enough room to maneuver. This'll prevent many of them from being able to use their weapons. Exile shrugged his shoulders. They're trying to trick us into going through the formation in the areas that they can deal more harm. This lot in front of us is nothing but an intimidation tactic. They want to scare us off from using this route. A couple of gasps accompanied his explanation, but Clay was not convinced. Why would that matter? They don't have to worry about hitting their own team. It's not like they'll do any damage. Exile considered Clay's argument before shaking his head. He finally realized something that had been nagging at his mind for some time now. Have any of you hit each other while in a party? The others looked confused by Exile's question. However, Clay's eyes went wide as he thought he understood what point Exile was attempting to make. Of course we haven't. That would just cancel attack. Right, and most gamers would never make that mistake for that reason. But have you ever seen a mob in this game accidentally hit another? Exile's mind raced to piece everything together. No. Clay raised his eyebrows as Exile's argument was becoming increasingly convincing. Well, I have. Exile's mind wandered to the trial where he had to make the mobs hit each other to advance. I think that trial was trying to make me aware that this game is different. Exile's expression sank as he put everything together in his mind. The developers are really going too far with the realism. He shook his head as he realized the degree of difficulty that would accompany team fights that were known to be messy. Everything in the game can probably commit friendly fire. Chapter 54. Not a typical game. You are listening at novelfull.audio. They discussed Exile's theory for a bit, before deciding that they should at least attempt to exploit it. If he was right, then it would make escaping the tomb much easier. If he was wrong, they could always retreat behind the barrier and attempt a fresh approach. Their expressions became sharp with determination as they prepared themselves to face the horde. Clay took a deep breath before he let out a shout. That was the signal for all hell to break loose. Old Un started the fight with a spell that fired 3 golden bolts into the enemies before detonating. What spell was that? Exile wondered as he raised an eyebrow. He was certain that the system had never offered him it. Still, he had no time to examine its effects as Clay dashed forward and struck at the nearest mobs. Leggy glowed with a golden aura as he dashed to Clay's right, which meant Exile had the left side to deal with. Meanwhile, Old Un kept himself close to Clay's back. He was using him as a shield to fire off his spells. Exile broke into a grin as he clashed with the Lost Warriors. His theory turned out to be correct. They were reluctant to attack for fear of striking their allies. Even though the mobs were densely packed in front of him, he only had to deal with 2 or 3 attacks at a time. The whole affair became much easier on them once they realized that they really could exploit this feature. By the time Old Un ran out of DP, they had forced their way into the crowd by several feet. Now, the Lost Souls were attempting to go around them to attack from the rear. However, Old Un was now free to cover that space. The party slowly formed a tight square formation to watch each other's backs. Exile checked his health while wearing a frown. 61/70. Not bad. How are the others doing? His mind turned its attention to the rest of the party. Clay's health had dropped to 78%, Old Un's health was at 95%, but Leggy's health was the worst case with only 58% left. Exile's frown deepened as he ducked behind his shield, narrowly avoiding the axe aimed at his neck. With a brief glance over his shoulder, he spotted Leggy wildly swinging his weapon without caring for defense at all. That explains it. Exile heaved a sigh. He knew that he would have to be prepared to grab Leggy's orb soon. Either that or he could risk using his healing now. It was a tough choice to make. If he healed the party, they could maintain the maximum damage per second for longer. However, it meant that he would be unable to use Cleansing Flame to its greatest potential if he had to make a break for it. As he slashed at another last warrior, finishing it off, he waited a while longer before making his decision. It would be a waste to use Raging Hearth right now as they would not gain the maximum effects from it. He would have to lose another 11 HP and Old Un would probably need to drop to around 80% of his health for it to truly be effective. 0.3 HP, Exile cursed under his breath. He was caught up in his thoughts and failed to react to a spear that struck his right side. It's only the weapons that use speed or authority for their damage that can hurt me. He had taken more than a few attacks before he reached this conclusion. His endurance had already reached a level where the mobs that use strength could no longer harm him. However, there was no way for him to pinpoint what stat each weapon used. For example, one spear had used speed, but another had used strength. He even suspected that there were weapons out there that could use endurance for its offensive. The game doesn't allow you to neglect any stat. Exile hummed as he blocked a hammer blow. Strength to pick up certain items, endurance for health, speed for faster travel, and authority to access powerful abilities. But all of them can be factors in your offensive damage or what you're capable of defending. Even though he was in the heat of battle, he never stopped analyzing the game. The traditional idea of a tank or DPS build has been thrown right out the window. There was no solid strategy for building a character based on any of these anymore. It was relative to what stats your opponent had dumped their points into. I guess it will really come down to your spells then if you want to focus on something. A complicated expression crossed Exile's face as he considered his own spells. They pointed toward him being a healer/support build. Which was a far cry from the usual DPS build he normally played. I can only hope that moving up the tiers will give me access to more offensive options. Exile sighed yet again as he bashed an enemy aside before slashing at its exposed back. By this point, they had crossed through the halfway mark. It took a brief moment for Exile to check everyone's health again, and his eyes went wide. Their health had dropped drastically while he had been thinking over the game's mechanics. Damn. Exile glanced around him before he decided it was worthwhile to try and keep everyone alive. He immediately cast Raging Hearth and over the next 4 seconds everyone regained a valuable chunk of health. The brief suppression on their opponent's stats allowed the party to cut down the closest mobs that had been hounding them. Clay subtly glanced at Exile's back with a raised eyebrow. He's more reliable than I thought. I was sure he would save his DP to let himself escape. Although he was willing to trust that Exile would recover their orbs if they died, he did not expect him to decide to reduce the casualty rate as much as possible. A small, yet sad smile played on Clay's lips as he parried a sword that was aimed for his heart. Chapter 55. No One Left Behind. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Under Clay's leadership, while following Exile's plan, the group made steady progress. Most of the time they forced the mobs aside rather than exchange blows until they killed them. And now, they were only a few feet from breaking out of the encirclement. Since they were almost free, everyone turned their attention to the front. They abandoned the other sides as they focused on breaking through the remaining mobs. The group began to accumulate damage under those conditions. But it was not life-threatening enough to force Exile to heal the group a second time. The group burst through the crowd and made a mad dash for the cave that led back outside. Arrows rained down on them from behind as they attempted to put as much distance between themselves and the lost warriors as possible. Exile shrugged the arrows off as his health dropped to 36/70. Leggy cried out before his body hit the ground and turned into particles of light that drifted off. Exile cursed under his breath as he raised his shield and dashed back to grab the orb that was left behind. The damage was too severe and came too quickly for him to save Leggy's life. The mobs were frantic as they tried to close the distance when they saw Exile turn back to retrieve Leggy's orb. The archers amongst the lost warriors stopped aiming for the group and focused fire on Exile. Most of them struck the ground, missing him by a narrow margin. While the rest created dull thuds as they embedded themselves in his shield. When Exile's hand touched Leggy's orb, he stored it in his inventory. He spared a quick glimpse over the rim of his shield to see the lost warriors getting closer by the second. Exile cursed as he realized they would catch up before he could rejoin the others. Damn! I should have left it. Exile cursed as he raced back towards the remaining two. Run! They're right behind you. Clay's warning rang in Exile's ears as his feet pounded against the ground. 0.7 HP, Exile swore as he spun to slash at the mob who had just stabbed him with a short sword, but the lost warrior was nimble enough to escape that strike. However, that brief respite gave him the chance to make another break for it. He ran as if his life depended on it, but the mobs were not ready to give up yet. Their weapons and armor made a lot of noise as they continued the chase. Meanwhile, Clay and Oldun had disappeared into the cave ahead. Just as Exile was about to curse them out for abandoning him, Clay's head suddenly poked out from the cave. When he saw the situation that Exile was in, he did not hesitate to rush to his aid. Exile could only frown as he saw that. Although he was ecstatic about the sudden help, he did not expect that Clay was serious when he said that he had to survive even if it cost the others their lives. Just as Exile was still coming to grips with Clay's decision, Oldun made his own reappearance to join the fray. Exile felt the mounting pressure ease up a little as the pair passed him to hold off the mobs. He did not know for how much longer he could have endured the bombardment while trying to escape. So he was grateful for the assist. Once he was clear of the melee, he used Raging Hearth again to prevent the others from dying as they disengaged from the enemies. Before long they had already caught him and were voicing their thanks towards him. I was right. Clay thought as he studied the serious expression on Exile's face. He'd make an outstanding leader. If we wanted to bring him in permanently, I'd have to step aside. Clay shook his head with a sad smile. He had the same thought earlier, but it had become more solidified now. If they did not recruit him into their group, there was a good chance that they would become enemies down the line. Especially when he considered the nature of the game. If we can at least part as friends or allies, that would be good too. The trio entered the mouth of the tunnel, and only after a few minutes of running did they notice they could no longer hear the sound of their pursuers. They slowed to a stop and listened carefully. But it really seemed as if the mobs had given up. They exchanged confused expressions before Exile made a guess as to what was going on. Maybe they can't leave that room. Exile frowned as he thought of the only explanation that made any sense. Maybe. Clay cocked an eyebrow at the tunnel behind them. Still, I can't believe we made it out of there. Old Un shook his head before a burst of soft laughter escaped his mouth, which became increasingly louder. Soon, all three of them were leaning on the wall and laughing at their success. They had raided the tomb and the only thing they had to do now was claim their rewards. It was a hell of an experience. Clay chuckled, as a glint appeared in his eyes. Plus, we didn't leave anyone behind. So the results aren't half bad. There's just the matter of Leggy losing half of his stats during the trials. Clay sighed as he realized they came out better than when they went in. The rewards would solve a decent chunk of Leggy's problem and it should not take long to get him back up to full strength. His sights fell on Exile as he wondered if this would be a good chance to broach the subject of future cooperation. However, Exile's mind was already thinking of something else. The beta won't last much longer and there's still a lot to do. It'd be good if I can found a Pantheon and check in on Anya soon. There's no telling what will happen if the developers patch the game during the time between the beta's end and general release. Chapter 56. Twilight of the Old Gods. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Anya walked around Iraldsfen before heading towards the temple. Along the way, she noticed that more and more of the villagers were looking at her with respectful gazes and bowing their heads at her passing. The temple had found a sudden surge of worshippers visiting it once they settled the ordeal with the men from Cordon. She was pleased more of her people had found comfort in the warm embrace of Exile's protection. But she knew it could not last. The people from Cordon would eventually notice that something had gone wrong. With Iraldsfen being the closest village, they would definitely fall under their suspicion. I wonder how we can deal with this. Anya sighed as she smiled towards a group of village girls. How will the goddess of Cordon respond to what we did? I hope we did not make things worse for Lord Exile. The sunlight made the blue streaks in Anya's hair appear quite vivid. It was a beautiful sight to see. Especially as it was quite rare for people to be born with hair like hers. In the whole of Iraldsfen, no one else had even a single streak in their hair. Anya heaved a helpless sigh as she thought about the stories her father used to tell her. Those with multiple colors of hair were supposedly gifted in magic, according to those stories. It would be great if it were true, as it would mean that she would be more capable of spreading Exile's name for him throughout Scardia. However, Anya had never even felt slightly magical. Since she had lived in Iraldsfen her entire life, she had never even seen someone who could use magic. But her father would often describe battles against sorcerers and witches that would take place during his raids. However, a part of her suspected it was just nonsense that he made up to make the stories more enjoyable. She had to admit that it was entertaining to hear about. Maybe I should ask Lord Exile about it. He is a god, after all. Or would that be too rude of me? Anya frowned as she wondered if it were appropriate to ask the gods such nonsensical questions. That was when her ears picked up the sound of Bjorn talking to the worshippers in the temple. He was in the middle of some long-winded story about the gods of old. Anya shook her head as she entered the doors and stood in the back. So as not to disturb his speech. That was when he blew his mighty horn to signal the attack. The fallen trembled beneath the sound as the Skardian gods led the offensive. Bjorn's eyes were wide as he made theatrical gestures with his hands. That's right. It wasn't the elves known for their wisdom. Nor the war beasts who love fighting the most. Neither was it the other gods of the human realms. It was Skardia. And our gods that marched alone to stop their invasion. Anya smiled as she remembered being told this story when she was young. It was one of her favorites and instilled a sense of pride in her for being a Skardian. However, as she grew up, and the gods failed to answer her prayers, she came to believe that they were only stories. Just like everyone else. However, this story now had an additional question behind it. Was the War of the Fall the reason the gods had disappeared? Anya frowned as she recalled it was one of the last stories in the history of the gods. If the war really happened, then was it possible that the Skardian gods had all died in battle? Assuming that was true, then another god could kill even exile. Anya chewed on her lip as she considered the implication of that heretical thought and how it corresponded with the people from Corden. She had only just found a god that had taken care of her and now another one was possibly trying to kill him off. She could not pretend that she understood the ways of the gods, but a deep hatred took root in her heart for Donna the Great at that thought. Is this why he's caught up in the heavens? Is he already fighting a war and trying to keep us out of it? Anya could not help but mull over the things Bjorn had been saying recently. Maybe it really was their duty to remove exile's enemies in the human lands. Anya's attention was drawn back to Bjorn's story as it was reaching its climax. The battle was bloody, and many gods fell that day. Some would return to the fields of battle, while they lay others to rest eternally. Bjorn shook his head as a single tear ran down his cheek. Even a blind person could see how much love he had for the gods. Despite their great strength, they could not hold the line. The gods from faraway lands who were supposed to be their allies never came. Without reinforcements, the fallen pushed the Skardian gods back. They did not fear war, but neither would they stay to fight a losing battle. The mighty horn was sounded once more, signaling the retreat. Bjorn waved his hands helplessly, as if it were a crushing defeat. However, Olivia stayed behind. She had always been a kind goddess that sought to improve our lives. When she saw the mountains of corpses, her comrades who would never grace the world again and thought of how the fallen would treat us. A fury erupted from within, the likes of which she had never shown before. It is said that no god witnessed what she actually did. Her fury was like an unbridled storm that lasted for a brief second. The heavenly skies darkened beneath the blanket of black clouds. Then, a blinding flash of light appeared before the scent of burning flesh could be smelled by everyone who was present. She killed hundreds of fallen in that one mighty blow. The worshippers leaned forward, perched on the edge of their seats as they listened. Bjorn's performance was enthralling, and many of them had never heard the story in its entirety. However, Bjorn's voice became loud as he held a finger up to the sky. That was also her downfall. They already weakened her from the battle, and she spent the last of her strength to deliver that crushing blow. Since she had stayed behind, she was swiftly surrounded and torn limb from limb in a mad frenzy. Although she returned by the grace of the gods, that fury was never seen again. Chapter 57. Heavenly Troubles. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Anya waited until the villagers offered their prayers and vacated the temple before showing a soft smile to Bjorn. The latter returned it in kind before making his way towards her. He stopped but a few steps in front of her and performed a polite bow. Anya's face turned a bright shade of scarlet at Bjorn's behavior. But she kept her mouth shut so as not to appear rude. Lady Eraldson, Oracle to our Divine Lord, it's a pleasure to see you again so soon. Bjorn kept his head bowed a moment longer before raising his gaze to meet hers. Thank you. Anya stammered, as her mind was still spinning from the elder, showing her the deepest of respect that was usually saved for a king. You're welcome. May I ask? Has Exile communicated with you recently? I wish to know if our sacrifices appeased any anger that he may have had for us not dealing with the problem sooner. Bjorn frowned with concern as he searched her eyes for the answer he so desperately craved. I'm afraid not. Anya sighed dejectedly, making Bjorn's heart skip a beat. However, I was just about to try contacting him. Would you like to wait for his response? You're too kind, Lady Eraldson. Since you have offered, it would honor me to accept. Bjorn performed another deep bow as he waited for Anya to approach the altar. Bjorn's eyes flashed with excitement as he watched Anya clasp her hands and place her forehead on the stone structure. This was the traditional Skardian pose for asking for anything from the gods. He nodded in approval as he waited for the slight golden glow that had shimmered from her body the last time. Exile, hear my prayer. Anya waited. It had taken several minutes the last time for Exile to respond. However, time passed and there was no answer. A frown appeared on Anya's face as she began to wonder if something had happened. He is a god. I can't expect him to answer every time, right? She let out a soft sigh and was about to give up when she suddenly heard the familiar static in her mind. A slight smile appeared on her face before disappearing. I'm going to kill you, Donna. A confused expression flickered across Anya's face as she heard the hostility in Exile's tone. Lord Exile? Anya questioned while wondering about the affairs of the gods. Anya. What's the matter? Is Eraldsfen under attack? No, everything is fine here. Anya's face darkened as she heard the urgency in Exile's voice. It was clear she had caught him at a bad time, but his early words and then his question of Eraldsfen's well-being put her on edge. Is there something we should be preparing for? Oh. No. I'll take care of it here. You don't have to worry. You're sure everything is fine? Clay. Damn you, Eri. Anya's mind began to spin as she heard the names of what she assumed to be more gods casually being thrown around. From the sounds of it, Exile was caught up in a godly battle. His concern for the one called Clay told her that at the very least it was a 2-on-2 fight. With Exile and Clay on one side. Donna and Eri on the other. But from what she heard, Exile may be all alone now and outnumbered. Anya tried to think of a way to help. However, she was only a human and unable to influence the affairs of the gods. Bjorn stood to the side with a concerned expression. I hope that doesn't mean he did not like our offerings. Bjorn shook his head sadly. Since he was out of the loop with their conversation, he assumed that they were talking about the sacrifices. Anya, I've got to go. With those last words, the connection was interrupted, and Anya could no longer hear Exile's voice. A grim expression appeared on her face as she digested what she had heard. Lord Exile is being cornered by Donna. What can we do? She did not like being stuck here, unable to help. Net, what's the matter? Bjorn asked with a frown upon his face. He was concerned that their sacrifice had displeased their god. If that were true, then he would have created a serious problem for Anya. Most likely he could expect for Exile to smite him at any time. It seems that the goddess of Corden is targeting Lord Exile. From what I heard, he was caught in a battle that involved at least 4 gods including himself. Anya shook her head as a tear appeared from the corner of her eye. Bjorn's eyes went wide as he stared at Anya. Apparently, he had been worrying for nothing. But this brought a fresh set of problems. We can't let those cowards from Corden get away with this. Bjorn's knuckles turned white as he clenched his fists. There aren't many warriors left in Eraldsfen. But there should be enough for us to hit back if we're careful. Anya. You take care of Eraldsfen. I'm going to gather some people and go over to Corden. I'll definitely do something about this. Bjorn's face turned scarlet as he marched out of the temple, leaving a bewildered Anya behind. how's he going to talk them out of attacking Lord Exile? Besides, can he even make it in time? Anya felt a wave of loneliness wash over her as she stood before the altar. Although Bjorn clearly cared for Exile, she doubted that he felt the same way that she did. Losing the god who had given some meaning to her life other than to become a simple wife. Well, she did not want to think about what would become of her. Meanwhile, Exile dove into a roll as he scooped up Clay's orb, while avoiding the spell that had been fired at him from between the trees. As he came back to his feet, he glared over his shoulder at Donna, who was chasing after him. Chapter 58. Unfinished Business. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Damn it. Exile grit his teeth as he dodged around a tree to use it as cover. A golden shock wave suddenly blew apart part of the tree. It was the same spell that took Clay out of the fight. He thought he had dodged it only for it to explode and catch him with the aftermath. There was shouting going on all around them. Kaleidoscope had attacked during their trip back to Valheim. However, where they attacked was the problem. Other players were in the area exploring, looking for new mobs. Unfortunately for those groups, they got caught up in the fight. Clay and the others had held up their end of the deal and stood by him. But Kaleidoscope outnumbered them, and now Exile was the only one left alive. Barely. HP, 21/70ths, 55 plus 15, DP. 0/10, 8 plus 2, how am I going to get out of this one? Exile cursed as he checked his current HP and DP. If it carries on like this, I'm screwed. Exile dashed between the trees, hoping that his enemies would hesitate to attack for fear of wasting more DP. If I could reach Valheim. His mind raced to think of a solution. The area around the city would be full of players, which should make Kaleidoscope warier of continuing their assault. Even they could not afford to offend too many other players this early in the game. There was only one problem with that plan. He would have to cross the open fields full of divine wolves. Not only would he be an easier target, but one wrong move could cause him to aggro the mobs calling that area home. Though, the same applied to Kaleidoscope. Exile grit his teeth as he decided that it was the best plan for now. If he stayed in the forest, they would eventually corner him. Donna screamed from somewhere behind him as a disgruntled player decided to target her. Exile grinned at her misfortune. But that's exactly what would happen if you got other people caught up in your own problems. The sounds of battle carried throughout the forest as splinters flew through the air. Many trees became unfortunate victims of the carnage unfolding around them. Exile's eyes narrowed as he spotted the edge of the tree lean, meaning he was about to rush out into the open. Here goes nothing. As he left the forest behind and entered the hills, he noticed around 20 other players grinding the wolves there. Good. I can use them for cover. He was careful enough to skirt around the edges of their battles to show that he had no intention of kill stealing. As such, these players paid him no mind. It was only when Eri and a couple of others burst out from the forest and pointed at him angrily that these players realized that something was wrong. Eri fired a spell that missed Exile by a wide margin, striking a nearby mob instead. The players who were fighting the pack it was a part of were instantly infuriated. They thought Eri was attempting to kill Steel. The other groups in the area who saw this became wary of Eri's group, sending one player each to the edges of their own battles to warn them away. Exile grinned when he saw this, as they did not stop him. After all, he was just passing through. Whereas Kaleidoscope were potential poachers. Exile could hear Eri swearing at him from somewhere behind him. Probably because she was now being forced to take a longer way around. I can make it. Exile raced around the mobs and avoided the players while keeping his eyes on the walls of Valheim up ahead. That was when he heard numerous players shouting in outrage. When he glanced over his shoulder, Donna was barreling her way through the players, who tried to warn her away. She was not even trying to protect herself from the spells that were fired in her direction. Damn! What's she thinking? Exile's eyes went wide as he realized that she would be able to catch up to him. He cursed under his breath as he glanced to the side to see how Ares' group was doing. If Donna holds me up long enough, Ares will be able to corner me. Exile frowned as he realized a dark cloud now hung over his hopes of escaping the pursuit. If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. Exile cleared the last pack of wolves and spun to prepare himself for battle. Donna had managed to close most of the distance by this point, and there was a glint in her eyes when she saw Exile had stopped. She's probably put most of her points in endurance and speed. Exile frowned while raising his shield and gripping his axe. Donna laughed as she pulled a spear from her inventory and cleared the last pack of mobs as well. Exile stared at the weapon in her hands. She never had it before, which meant that Kaleidoscope had probably given it to her. His eyes met hers, and the tension between them rose. You're going to pay for not dying back there. If you had just fought them, they wouldn't have cornered us. It was you they wanted anyway. Donna yelled as she inched towards Exile. It was then that Exile realized something. Where's Beans? Exile sighed as he guessed what had happened. Kaleidoscope had probably killed Beans, and Donna had offered some intelligence in exchange for her life. Now, she was blaming him for her friend's death. Well, you guys abandoned me first. So don't expect me to feel sorry for you. Exile roared as he pounced towards Donna while swinging his axe. The latter snorted as she easily dodged the blow and thrust her spear towards his exposed side. Exile was prepared for it and swung his shield in a way that made the rim deflect the spear before it could land. Her reach is longer than mine. This won't be easy. Chapter 59. Level 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Exile grunted as he checked his health after Donna's recent blow. 15/70. His lips curled into a snarl as he turned to face her. She was using her superior range to keep out of his reach and deal damage wherever she could. Her weapon targets my speed, so my endurance is worthless here. Donna smiled as she continued to dance, just out of reach. Not long ago, she had thought it would be impossible to take him down on her own. This wouldn't be possible without this spear Ares gave me. Once I kill you, I'll be a member of Kaleidoscope. Donna licked her lips at the thought of the stat points she would gain from Exile's orb when he dropped it. Exile glared at her as he tried to keep his cool. He had no DP left to cast any divine spells, so he had to rely on his physical capabilities. Any attack of Donna's that slipped past his shield would deal damage, which was making him feel pressured. Exile ignored her weapon and kept his eyes trained on her shoulders and legs. Since these body parts would give away her next movement earlier than anything else. Donna was growing impatient. If the fight carried on much longer, then Ares' team would join in. Meaning that she would no longer have the sole claim over Exile's orb. That was when she made a mistake. Her impatience got the better of her as she pounced with a quick thrust. Exile reacted to the bend in her legs and pounced forward at almost the same time. Donna's eyes went wide as her spear slid along Exile's shield before he punched out, slamming its rim into her face. As she flinched from the attack, he quickly followed up with a blow from his axe. Since Donna had not invested in authority, his axe dealt a straight 10 points of damage to her while his shield had dealt 5. In total, his one attack drained 15 points of her remaining health. Donna spun with a furious expression on her face. But Exile was one step ahead. Her eyes went wide as Exile tackled her to the ground, pinning her beneath his shield. She wanted to scream at him, but he hacked at the side of her head with his axe. Her eyes went wide in horror as she felt her HP draining at a rapid pace. She was about to beg him to stop when her expression froze. The axe was coming at her head again. Before she could say anything, Exile struck savagely with a mad glint in his eyes. Donna sighed as her health bottomed out. Exile dropped to the ground now that her body turned into motes of light and no longer supported him. He could not help but laugh when he rolled over. A golden orb lay on the snow-covered ground beside him. "I'll be having that for all the trouble you caused." As he reached out to absorb it, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. "Oh, sure." Exile rolled over and grabbed the orb before storing it in his inventory. Moments later, a spell exploded where he had been, throwing snow into the air, blinding his vision. "Airy." Exile growled as he took damage from the explosion. A critical warning flashed in his mind that told him his HP had dropped to July 15th. "One more hit of that and I'm done for." Exile sighed as he realized that there was no way out for him now. He was certain to die in the next few minutes. "Just give me what I want and I'll let you go." Airy chuckled as the snow settled. "What would that be?" Exile cocked an eyebrow at her while showing a confused expression. "You can't fool me. Your little friend already said she was certain that you gained something important in the tomb you guys explored." Airy covered her mouth with her hand as she chuckled. "Truth be told, I already figured you would gain something for being the first to enter that shop. Now hand it over like a good little boy, it'll do more good in Kaleidoscope's hands than yours." "Don't know what you're talking about." Exile shrugged his shoulders. "Plus, there's no confirmation that she can get it from killing me. It's better to take the death and hope I keep the first flame fragment." "Don't blame me then. I gave you a way out. If it doesn't drop after one death, I'll just keep killing you until I get what I want." Airy snarled as her hands began to glow. Exile stared at that light and knew his time was up. He heaved a sigh as he prepared his shield in a last act of defiance. He was definitely not fast enough to outrun the explosion that would follow the spell. "I hope I don't lose the other guy's orbs." Clay and his team were actually decent guys. Exile grit his teeth as Airy pointed her palms towards him. The golden light shot forth as a bolt aimed directly at Exile's chest. Exile closed his eyes as he waited for the death notification. However, several moments passed and nothing happened. In fact, there was nothing but silence to hear when he should be at least hearing the other players fighting the mobs. His eyes flickered open to see the bolt of light inches from his face. "What the?" His eyes darted around and noticed that everything in the game had come to a standstill. It was then that he realized that he could not move his body. "What's going on?" Airy, who was across from him, had a similar look of confusion on her face as she was stuck in the same pose. But they soon got their answer. Server announcement. A player has reached level 5. Pantheon Online closed beta test will now end. Pantheon Online servers will now shut down. Game will enter open beta in 3 days. Developers will make an announcement regarding the game on its official page in 1 hour. Exile raised his eyebrows at the series of notifications. Right before he was forcefully ejected from the game. Chapter 60. Attack on Corden. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bjorn peered between the trees at the walls of Corden. A deep frown appeared on his face as he glanced at the people who had come along with him. "This is all for Lord Exile. We can't let him down." The old warrior motioned for the group to follow him as he led them back into the forest. Once they were far enough away from the town, he chose a rock to sit on before looking at everyone's determined expressions. "Remember, we are only here to deal a blow to Donna the Great's followers. We will not attack innocent civilians." Bjorn glared at them to make his point clear. "This is not a typical raid. We are here to further the glorious name of Exile and strike a blow to his enemies." "What if the civilians attack us first?" someone in the group asked, while the others agreed with Bjorn. "Then that would make them an enemy of Exile. So what do you think?" Bjorn growled in response as the man wore an enlightened expression. "Did everyone bring their ropes?" The crowd checked their belts for the ropes they had turned into grappling hooks, using the large spear hooks for hunting tundra whales. When everyone confirmed they were ready, Bjorn led them around the town's walls. He was searching for a good point of entry. We have to locate their temple quickly. It'll be enough of a message if we kill their oracle. They had almost completely circled the town by the time Bjorn found an area he was happy with. There was a building on the other side of the wall that was almost completely pressed up against it. It would provide excellent cover for their infiltration. The group spread out and began to swing their grappling hooks by their side. When they built up enough momentum, they released them. The metal clanked as they struck the opposite side of the wall, but no alarms were raised. Bjorn nodded his head with satisfaction as they began their brief climb. Some of them held their breath, worried that someone would discover them at any moment. But everything went smoothly as they regrouped on the other side. Bjorn gestured to two young women who were accomplished hunters back in Iraldsven. They immediately understood that he wanted them to scout out Corden and discover the temple's location. As they disappeared between the buildings, Bjorn sat down and signaled for the others to do the same. As long as they stayed quiet, it was unlikely that they would be discovered. A patrol would have to deliberately leave the main streets and search behind this building to find them. However, before they could get comfortable, the women returned. Bjorn frowned as he looked at them. Did they run into trouble? One of them came close before saying what they had found in a low voice. The temple is quite small. It's just across the road. Lucky. Exiles surely smiling down on us. A light appeared in Bjorn's eyes as a wicked smile appeared on his face. He excitedly motioned for the group to follow him as he got up and led the way between the buildings. Sure enough, there was a small building just across the road that appeared unloved. They made the whole thing of logs, with gaps between them. They had taken no care in its creation at all. Do they have no respect for the gods at all? Despite Donna the Great being their enemy, the sight infuriated Bjorn. He even began to wonder if she really had many followers in Corden. Could it be that they felt the need to look for followers elsewhere because hardly anyone here believes in her? Bjorn felt like he had hit the proverbial nail on the head as he looked at the ramshackle temple. Still, that doesn't excuse her for starting a war with exile. Bjorn's expression turned stone cold as he glanced up and down the street. There was nobody out at this time of night, which made their job easier. The group kept low as they dashed across the dirt road, eager to get this over with before the entirety of Corden could react. Bjorn slammed his shoulder against the wooden door, which failed to resist his effort. The door collapsed from its hinges and fell inside of the temple as the group stormed in. They gripped their weapons tightly as they prepared for any resistance. However, they frowned as several people on the floor turned to look at them with a hunger in their eyes. Beggars. Someone gasped as he glanced at these frail figures. None of them looked like they had eaten a decent meal in months. They actually looked too weak to defend themselves. The group appeared hesitant when they realized that the warriors that had visited Iraldsven were definitely within the minority of this goddess's believers. Kill them. Bjorn growled as his expression remained cold. His order startled the group. Many of them pitied these poor people. The will to fight had slowly fled from them as they digested the situation. Bjorn snarled as a few in the group pushed their way to the front. These men and women nodded before walking off to put the beggars out of their misery. Even if they are pitiable. Bjorn paused as he glanced at those who failed to act. They are still the source that empowers the goddess who wants to remove exile from our lives. Don't be deceived, they are still our enemies. Bjorn stormed through the short hall as the beggars screamed for their lives. A voice was silenced with every few footsteps that he took. His eyes were focused on the pathetic door that separated the hall from another room. That must be where the oracle lives. Bjorn sneered, as he pushed the door open. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the slightly darker room. His eyes fell on a dirty figure sitting on a pile of hay against the wall. Tears streamed down his face as he hugged his knees to his chest. Though the figure was too scared to say anything. Bjorn's eyes went wide as he shook his head. He still has several winters until he reaches Anya's age. Bjorn sighed as he stroked his axe between his thumb and forefinger. Blame your goddess for this. A small scream escaped from the back room of the temple, which sent a chill down the spines of the others. Even the most hardened amongst them understood what they heard and trembled slightly. Pantheon Online System Log: Donna the Great, goddess of the harvest, has no active oracles left, revoking player Donna the Great's divinity. Player Donna the Great has been forcefully ejected from the game. Player Donna the Great has been permanently banned from Pantheon Online.